Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Just to You podcast. My name is Eric Nicole, and I'm your host. If you are a first time listener, welcome to the conversation. And if you're a regular, I'm honored that you've decided to join me for another episode. The Just to You podcast is centered around a network of conversations which are meant to connect us, to inspire us, to find our own confidence, our own voice, and to live our own truth. And who knows, we might even learn a little something new that ultimately allows us to live in the sweet spot that I like to call the just do you space of being. Each week, I have the privilege of sitting down for unscripted conversations with friends, family, colleagues, community leaders, and influencers that all share their own personal journeys. I hope that you enjoy our time together as much as I have. We are certainly going to laugh, and yes, we might even cry a little, but in the end, we're going to know that we're not alone during our life's journey. So, are you ready? Great, let's do this. Welcome to the conversation. All right, everyone, welcome to today's episode. I'm going to jump right in and introduce my guest. I have been so excited all week knowing that she was going to come on. I have wanted her on for quite a while, so it's an honor and a privilege today to introduce everyone to Janessa Goldbeck. Hi, Janessa.
Hey, thanks for having me, Eric.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Happy post 4th of July. I hope you had a good time and enjoyed some, hopefully, rest over the weekend.
Yeah, it's a weird time in America to be celebrating
Mhm.
America, but I did have a really nice restful weekend, saw some
Good.
good friends, and yeah, just enjoyed being in community.
That's what it's all about. That's what we're going to talk about today. So thank you for being here. I'm excited for our guests to get to know you a little bit more. I'm going to go ahead quickly and just read your bio because I was super, super impressed with your background. We're going to get into that a little bit, but I'd like to do this and I have a couple questions for you. Does that work?
Sounds great.
Okay, so for our listeners, and buckle up because Janessa is super impressive. She's the CEO of the Vet Voice Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to amplifying the voices of veterans in the fight for justice and equity and policy change. She's got over 15 years of experience in public policy, government affairs, strategic consulting, and she brings a great insight into legislative expertise into all of her work. She's a powerful voice that leads with purpose and advocates for marginalized voices, especially within that veteran community. And she educates on why civil engagement is, or civic, I should say, excuse me, engagement is really more important than ever. And her journey really began in the US Marine Corps, where she served as a combat engineer and a civil affairs officer. And I love this, later leading a 120-person unit on a deployment that spanned 8 countries. Janessa has consistently worked at the intersection of what she calls leadership, impact, and service. So welcome, Janessa, to the Just You podcast. It's a pretty impressive resume.
It's
Makes
just
me feel,
life takes you in funny directions sometime. If you told me that I would have wound up in the Marine Corps as a young kid growing up the child of two hippie pacifist vegetarians in San Diego, that I would wind my way into the Marine Corps and be a professional veterans advocate, I would have looked at you like you had two heads.
I'm, regardless of that, I'm glad that you did. And I'm glad that's where you ended up. And that's actually a great lead into our conversation today, is this is designed to be a casual conversation, like we're having a cup of coffee and just getting to know each other. But the powerful thing that I'm finding, especially within our community, is that, and it's interesting how our childhood and our younger years really have shaped, whether we thought it was directly or indirectly, our future. So my first question to my guest is always to just take us back a little bit. Let us know a little bit about the young Janessa. Where were you born? What was family life like? Siblings, that kind of thing. What was young Janessa like?
Yeah, it feels like forever ago. I'm turning 40 this year, so it's getting a little foggier every year. But I grew up here in San Diego County. I grew up in
Mhm.
Encinitas, a little beach town. As I mentioned, my parents were hippies who had converted to Hinduism in the 60s and or late 60s, early 70s, around the time when Eastern religions were picking up popularity amongst people who hadn't experienced them before. So they moved to Encinitas to be part of an organization called Self-Realization Fellowship, which is a sort of church of all religions, but centered around Hinduism and meditation and yoga here in San Diego County. And so that's what brought them here. So I grew up in that community. My favorite meal growing up was something called tofu Italiano, which was basically tofu with cheese and marinara sauce on it, which is like pretty horrendous when I think about it. But that was a pretty exciting meal for me and my vegetarian household. Yeah, I was into skateboarding and the ocean, very much like your typical Southern California kid. And
Sure.
when I grew up, I thought I wanted to be a writer or maybe a marine biologist. Ended up going to college in Chicago, Illinois for both a degree in both journalism and African studies. I studied abroad in East Africa when I was an undergrad, and that's really where my sort of political and engagement awakening happened. I was studying in Rwanda and Uganda and learning about the Rwandan genocide. As I was learning about that and actually going and visiting some of the sites where the genocide had taken place, where you could literally still see human bones in the pews of churches, I learned that there was a genocide ongoing in the country of Sudan in a region called Darfur. And as a young person who had literally been standing in these sites and really impacted by them, I really wanted to do something. So came back to the United States and started organizing on my campus, and was my first foray in civic engagement.
So go back a little bit. It's fascinating to me that you started your life off in Encinitas. That's where I'm sitting right now. Actually, I know this town has always been known for its, now we call it bougie hippie, hippiness.
Yes,
In
it's
the year
definitely
20, way bougier now than it was. I always like to say it's the Birkenstocks that pop out of the Mercedes S-Wagon. So as they're dropping their kids
exactly.
off at school and then heading over to do Pilates. But it's a great town and it's a really great environment because it still has that really fantastic sense of community. And that's why I moved here. And I've been really blessed since I moved here in December of 2019. Our community specifically around that time, obviously 2019, 2020, we were about to venture off into another crazy time in our lives. And the one thing that got me through was this community. Not only was it very diverse, we had several gay and lesbian couples and people who lived in the neighborhood. It was a place with just a lot of love and a lot of support. And I have found that throughout our community here and also throughout San Diego. But I'm curious, as a young child, as you were growing up with these parents and you were obviously involved in this conversation around spirituality and that type of thing. What was that like for you as a kid? Because that's not typical, right? What were the conversations that you were having in your head about it? Or was it just all that you knew?
Yeah, it was like I had a foot in two different worlds. My mom was a public school, when I was young, was a Montessori school teacher. And so I went to Montessori school with a lot of other kids that were being raised with similar backgrounds, a lot of whom were going to the same temple that I was going to. And so that felt very familiar. But then when I was in fifth grade, I transitioned to public school, and this was the 90s, and there were, in San Diego County in particular, New Agey Christianity was the popular thing. And a lot of kids in my school were in bands that played at the local Christian church. And there was all kinds of music actually coming out of San Diego that was like wrapped up in that religion. And I wasn't like particularly religious, but as I'm reflecting back on it, where you went to church and where you went to school really obviously shaped you and who you were. So I always felt I go over to a friend's house for dinner or something, I would not say that I was a vegetarian because I was embarrassed, or not talk about meditation and yoga. It's so funny because in retrospect, I'm like, what an amazing way to grow up. I was eating great food. It was really healthy food. I was literally would meditate and do yoga every day, but I thought it was so annoying and so different and awkward. And so I just didn't really talk about it. It really wasn't until I got to college in Chicago and I would like pepper in little details about my personal life, going to surf PE in high school at San Diego. People were like, where did you grow up? Is this real
Yeah.
life?
Yeah.
And of course, now I very much appreciate that foundation that my parents gave me. But yeah, I just felt a little like when I was in that more public school world that I was a weirdo and that my
Mhm.
parents and family was weird.
I've said many times because a lot of the conversations that we have on this podcast will either end up there or meander its way through this conversation of wouldn't it be amazing if as children, I'm obviously a very different, I'm your parents' age. I have a feeling I could be
I
probably
don't
your
think
dad,
so.
which close enough. But how amazing it would be if they had taught us meditation and taught us how to be in connection with our body and how to be in tune with our thoughts and feelings and not suppress everything. I think about my PE was always about jumping jacks and burpees and pull-ups and running, and I hated it. I hated every minute of it. I wanted to go off and do something super cool and different. Back then it wasn't such a big thing, right, as it is now. But I look at it now and thinking, God, what a great way to grow up. You may resist it in the moment, but knowing and looking back later that you grew up in a space that was very grounded in what it
Yeah.
means to be happy and to be able to navigate and to deal with things that are stressful. These days, I have meditation and I'm actually in class right now being certified in sound bath healing, and I'm really excited about that. And just had a conversation last week with somebody who is really into music as a healing source. And so there's all these amazing opportunities now, which I think we need more than ever. But how great it would have been to grow up with that. I can imagine going to friends' houses that like I just have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich,
Yeah,
or
I
can I just have
definitely
a
I
burger? Like what is it?
remember, I distinctly remember the first time that I was served like a chicken breast at a friend's house. I remember it was at Rachel Nickerson's house, and her mom didn't know I was a vegetarian because I didn't say anything. And I remember I had never eaten chicken before, and I
My
remember just
gosh.
the sensation of it like sticking to my teeth and just like being, don't throw up at the table, like, don't spit it out, like you can do it. But yeah, I mean, that the grounding in meditation in particular, yoga and just controlling your breathing and all of that, all those things really came to serve me I went through my Marine Corps officer training and
Sure.
in that role. And it's something that I like to bring, actually, I liked to bring into my military service when I was at a particularly challenging school that was really physically grueling. I was asked by one of my instructors who saw me doing yoga like after our hikes or our larger evolutions, and he asked me if I would start leading yoga for our platoon. And our platoon ended up being the platoon that had the lowest injury rate because men typically don't stretch, which is something I
I
learned.
know.
And so we were stretching before and after and doing breath control and things like that. And those are really important and helpful things when it comes to your body and its ability to withstand really intense physical activity.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, and I've said this just last week, and actually the last 2 weeks on this episodes, is that wellness is starting to make its way into my industry, in the meetings and events industry, and it's almost becoming a little kitschy or a little cliche because they're using it as a space to fill a gap, as opposed to what are the real benefits of doing a 10-minute breath work session or breath control before you go into a stressful situation like sitting in front of a speaker for 3 hours where your mind and brain are going elsewhere. Because these
Right.
days we are so disconnected from that kind of source and ability to just sit and just be patient. And so I think it's a real benefit to have that. When you were in elementary and high school, you may have said this, so I apologize. I just want to get chronologically. Where did you think you were heading when you were going through middle school and into high school? What did you
Yeah,
think?
I think as a child, I wanted to be the quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. Some early indicators that I may have been a lesbian. That I quickly learned that was probably not going to happen. But I always loved reading and writing, and so I
Mhm.
wanted to write. And I loved the idea of being a reporter and going into journalism, which is what I ended up doing for
Mhm.
school, but never actually did professionally. And yeah, and then I loved animals and being outdoors. So I wasn't really sure. And in retrospect, it's the military was never on my radar. Both my
Mm,
grandfathers served in World War II, but they didn't talk about my one grandfather was deceased and the other one definitely didn't talk about it. And my parents were of the Vietnam generation, and like the military was certainly not on their radar for me. And basically, the only thing I knew about the military was the Marines were up the street in Oceanside, and I was never supposed to go to Oceanside. It just wasn't on my radar. It was like especially my mom as a teacher. Neither of my parents actually went to college. My mom got her teaching credential when I was in elementary school,
oh wow.
but it was still always drilled into me that college was the
Mhm.
next step. And I think if the
Mhm.
military had been like more accessible to me, it might have been appealing to me. I was very adventurous, very outgoing, very
Mhm.
athletic, but it wasn't on my radar at all.
I was gonna say, did you do a lot of sports in school? Did you
I did,
enjoy it?
yeah.
Mhm.
I was captain of the varsity lacrosse team my junior and senior year of high school. I played lacrosse and field hockey all through high school, and then big ocean kid, so
Mhm.
surfing, swimming, diving,
Mhm.
all that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't know if you hear that when I love when people share about what they did and won't even put the connection together that here you were captain of the team. And then, of course, many
Right.
years later, you're leading people in.
But
Yeah, sorry.
definitely, yeah, was a captain of the lacrosse team in high
Yeah,
school and got out of the Marines as a captain. So yeah,
yeah,
definitely
that's
foreshadowing.
awesome. Can I ask, do you mind when you came out?
No, so let's see, summer before my junior year of high school, I got an internship. So I'm in journalism school, and as part of that, they placed you at internships for a summer. And my internship was like my dream internship. I got as I was an intern at National Geographic Adventure magazine, which was
Wow.
in New York City. And so my job as the intern there was like copy editing, basic research. And then when they found out that I surfed and skateboarded, then I became the like tester for all the adventure gear that they would get sent by various companies. This
Yeah.
was, gosh, this is early 2000s. I got sent, the National Geographic Adventure got sent a Sector 9 longboard, which Sector 9 is all, those longboards are all over Southern California, but in New York, they'd never seen one. And they sent me with a photographer over to Columbia University to ride it around and get some photos. And we got chased out of the library by a security guard there. And it was just like a dream internship. I was 19 living there. I didn't know anybody except one girl from my high school who was at NYU. And I reached out to her and she was like, you got to come meet all my friends. And so I started hanging out with her. She was a lesbian. And at that point, like, I really didn't know any gay women. I had a couple gay guy friends in high school and college, but didn't know any gay women. In my mind, I had a very like homophobic sort of structure in my brain of who gay
Hmm.
women were, that they all looked a certain way, that they dressed a certain way. And here I am in New York City meeting up with my friend from high school who had this incredible rainbow cast of friends who were all different sort of gender presentations and various degrees of binary, non-binary, like just a million different types of people, just like we know that people are. But it was mind-blowing for me. And
Sure.
anyways, she invited me to my first Pride in New York City. And me and the other straight girl hung out at the parade all day long, and then we made out on the dance floor and we dated the rest of the summer. I came out to my friends and family that summer, and really no one was that surprised. I think I was just like a little bit of a late bloomer. Like I was never really, I dated guys, but I was not really
Hmm.
that into it. And I just didn't realize, but I was like that sort of total cliche thing where the first time I kissed her, I was like, oh, okay. That's
I
what's
of,
going
I often say that's pretty typical with
on.
many people. You may know or you may question, or I God love her to this day, but I dated somebody in high school because I was in love with her dad, who
Oh
was
man.
who was a
Oh my God.
swimmer. This was high school. So it was your high school,
Yeah.
but her dad was beautiful and a swimmer, and they had the pool, and we'd go over to their house after football games, and I'd be like
Yeah.
walking in the door all starry-eyed to this guy. There's a whole other story to that where he actually came out after his kids went to
Oh
college, and
wow.
I ran into him 10 years later, didn't know. It was crazy. But I dig
Wild.
I digress. That's a whole
Yeah.
other podcast episode. But I think it's interesting because I think we all have that switch. And when that switch happens, and for me, it was, I went to a very conservative school. My mom
Mm.
was a teacher. I was afraid to come out. I knew something was different. I didn't know what, because again, we didn't have, this was
Like no
1983,
role
84. We
models.
didn't have the role back then, didn't have role models. We were all preppy. So everyone looked great in a pair of loafers and no socks and their chinos and a blazer. So it was very confusing and didn't know and didn't have the education, didn't have the language, didn't have the experience and the opportunity, especially with our parents. So I think it's always very interesting when that switch, because same thing happened to me. It was like it took
Oh yeah.
that one time and kissed a girl in a bird aviary across the street from my house, and I was like, yeah, I don't, that's not it. And
Yeah.
6 months later, kissed the boy in that same aviary, and I was like, ah, okay,
Oh, yeah.
this is what it
And
is.
it's so funny how universal it is too. Like
Mhm.
like even more double down on the cliche. I totally had a huge crush on my best friend in high school, but it was
Mhm.
like she was like, oh, a separate, it's just her. I was, and
Yeah.
then I it didn't even connect any dots for me. I thought maybe this was, who I was. But then you come out and you start dating people and meeting people in your community, and you're like, oh, like everyone here had the same experience. Okay.
And
But
it's
that's
so
like
different. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I'm not actually jealous of Gen Z and the
Mhm.
generations below them because they have their own
Yeah.
crises that they're going to have to deal with. But definitely I think about it all the time with all of the pop culture icons and television shows and movies that now have queer representation on them and in them. And it's so cool that now we have
Mhm.
that where people can see themselves, and there's still obviously a long way to go in the diversity of representation, but it's very cool that
Sure.
people can see themselves.
Yeah. And now more than ever, more important for those of us who are seasoned, if you will, in our journey to get out there and speak about it and talk about it and make sure that our rights are retained and make sure that those stories continue to come out. I started this podcast so people could share their journey and share their story. And it's amazing when you see the response. To this day, it blows my mind that we've had amazing episodes. All my guests the last 2 seasons, every single one of them has just been mind blowing for me. And the one guest that's now been on 3 times who literally maintains the top 3 spots of the most downloaded podcasts of both seasons is the same person. And it's a trans man named Archer. And if you would have told me that was going to be the case when I started this podcast, I would have told you that's not going to happen. It was just going to be this myriad, and would people resonate with him? And I'll tell you, they've resonated, and it's interesting. Those are the top 3. The top 4 is dating. So it's all very interesting, the conversations that people resonate with. But I think it proves an interesting point in that, I may get a little flack for saying this, growing up into and through the communities of the cities in which I've lived, it has been a very predominantly gay, white, cisgender male kind of representation, right? There hasn't been a lot of people of color. There haven't been a lot of people from the bisexual community or the lesbian community or the trans community. And that was really important to me when I moved to San Diego after I left the desert, which was very cisgendered white male, gay male. To move here was, I need to have that diversity in that circle. And as I've met you and many of the other members of our community, I think we live in a really beautiful city in which that diversity is definitely there. And I appreciate that diversity. But again, I feel like we, as, I'll use the word elder, even though I don't want to, as these elders really make sure that now they have a chance to tell their story and that they feel seen and heard, especially with everything that's going on in our world right now. It's a scary place for them to be. I think even as easy as it is to see that representation, when it's called into question, it's tough. So I'm grateful for people like you, especially out in the community and doing the things that you do. So you go to college. So you've come out, go to college, right? Talk a little bit about that transition between those college years and then moving into your service. What does that transition look like?
Yeah, so I mentioned I came back from Rwanda and Uganda, and I really wanted to do something about what I felt was an injustice, and the U.S. government wasn't doing enough or anything about what was happening in Darfur, which was one of the first times that the UN had actually declared, the first time that the UN had declared what was happening in Darfur a genocide while it was still ongoing. So it wasn't like we weren't sure what was happening. Like, we knew for a fact, the international community knew for a fact that there was hundreds of thousands of civilians were being killed by the Sudanese government. And so I started organizing on my campus. I got connected with a couple of other students across the country who were also organizing around this topic. And this was right when Facebook and Gmail had just come out. And so for the first time, students had this ability to organize really rapidly and at scale across the country. So we started organizing. Then I became like the state director for Illinois. Then I became the national organizing director, managing a bunch of student volunteers. And by the time I was a senior in college, we had thousands, literally thousands of chapters at high schools and colleges across the country that were organizing around this. And we did some really cool things. We passed legislation. This is the height of Iraq and Afghanistan wars, so there was not a lot of appetite for additional foreign engagement, but we passed a funding package through Congress that provided hundreds of thousands of dollars to the African Union, which was providing peacekeeping operations there. We passed state level divestment legislation for various states from their pension funds divested from Chinese companies that were funding the government of Sudan and had their pension funds invested in these Chinese oil companies, and were able to pass that legislation in over 25 states. And so it was just this real, I didn't have any background or experience in this, but we were able to learn and teach ourselves and learn from other movements and other things like the South African apartheid movement, and be able to apply that to what we were doing. And I just totally fell in love with it. Like, the idea that you could see something that's wrong in the world and then actually work through the systems of government and levers of power to change it and apply real pressure in doing so. And so that was intoxicating to me. So I moved, after I graduated from college, I moved to Washington, D.C. to really put some legs under the student movement, turn it into a real organization with a few other students who were graduating that year, and ended up doing that work for several years in DC.
I apologize for backtracking just a little bit, because I think this is an interesting transition. When you were in high school and going into college, how did you decide on those 2 majors? What was the conversation? Because that's not typical.
Yeah,
of a
no,
girl that grew up
not
in
that
San
great.
Diego and Encinitas surfing. And what was that conversation? Where'd that come
Right. I guess so. I went to Northwestern because of its
from?
journalism school, and
Sure.
they offered me a full ride, so that was a no-brainer.
Nice.
And went off to college for that. But I'd always been really fascinated by African history, like
Mm,
post-colonial African history. And maybe this is the political nature of my brain and my interests, but thinking about this country that had been artificial, or continent that had been artificially divided up into these countries based on colonial powers and different things that had nothing to do with the cultures and the people that lived there. And then in many instances and in many countries were new democracies or newly formed coalition governments. There's just so much happening on the continent. And there is so much geopolitical drama at play between the struggles between China and the rest of the world to gain foothold in African countries and around the resources that African countries had. It just was fascinating to me. It was like there are so many incredible stories that are unfolding in real time. It just felt very alive to me, and I wanted to learn about it and be a part of it. And so I picked up an African studies minor and then ended up being able to study abroad over there and that's just in one tiny little corner of the continent, but that is how I got there. And so I thought at the time that I was gonna graduate and be a journalist, an international journalist focused on Africa, but got a little waylaid by
mhm.
activism.
Yeah. Did you always have this confidence?
Yeah, I think my family would say yes.
Mhm.
I think less, I would maybe code it less as confidence and more as like a high capacity for risk and a love
Okay.
of adventure.
Okay.
Definitely
That's,
done a lot of things that
I'll take that.
I have felt very uncomfortable and not confident doing, but
Mhm.
I have a high risk, high reward kind of mechanism in my brain. And I just am like very passionate about seeing the world and experiencing different things and living in other people's shoes.
Did that come from your parents or grandparents, or where did that came from?
I think a big part of it came from my mom.
Mhm.
I mentioned she was a Montessori teacher and she was very all about experiential learning. And she was very confident in me. My parents were very confident in me. They
Mhm.
definitely instilled this sense of you can do whatever you want, even if we don't know how to help you do that. Like I
Mhm.
remember when I went off to college, I went by myself and my wife always makes fun of me because I say I was 17 when I went to college. I really was. I turned 18 my
Mhm.
freshman year,
Right.
and I had only lived in Encinitas, and here I was in Chicago now. I remember calling my mom, and I had a work study job and an off-site job, and all these ways that I was paying my bills and everything else. And I remember calling my mom and saying, "It's like September, and it's getting really cold, and the warmest thing I have is a hoodie." Because I'm an Encinitas kid. I'm walking around barefoot
Yeah.
most of the time. And she's, "Oh, don't worry, hon. We got you a winter coat for Christmas." And it was like, I'm like looking out the window, there's already sleet. It was like September, October. And I was like, I'm going to be dead by Christmas if I don't get
Christmas.
a winter. You know what? I can't afford this on my like $8 an hour job or whatever it was. And so it was definitely a lot of trying to figure things out on my own. But my parents were always very supportive of me doing that, even if
Mhm.
they like weren't in a position to actually support or help
Sure.
me navigate.
Sure. Are you an only child?
I am, yeah. I started out as an only child.
Yep.
My parents got divorced when I was in college, and my dad ended up marrying the mother of my one of my childhood best friends. So I have a stepsister now who has known me. We've known each other our entire lives, and we basically grew up together as sisters. But yeah.
Yeah, there's a little only, I have a half brother from my dad's third marriage. I still consider myself an only child
Oh
because
yeah,
there was so
definitely.
much time in between. And yeah, it's just the attitude and that's the
Yes.
posture I think comes from is we are only children through and through.
Yeah.
Siblings are great.
My wife will tell you I definitely have an only child syndrome. Yeah. I'm very unique and special.
My ex-husband told me the same thing. So I told me the same thing. So I'm curious, we talked a little bit about the kind of confidence and that kind of drive and that kind of it resonates with me because my parents also got married right out of college and they both moved to Africa. They moved to Cairo,
Oh,
Egypt
no
and spent
way.
many years there. And I was supposed to be born there. It's a whole story and a podcast episode. But my dad worked for the UN and my mom was a teacher in the American school there. And they lived there for many years. And then my mom had some complications and went home and had me. And then, of course, my dad came home in 1966 and went off to war. So there was that kind of
Oh,
interesting
wow.
time frame. But I've had many conversations with her about what was that like to be a 25-year-old blonde hair? She looked like a blonde hair Jackie Kennedy, and she's walking around Cairo, Egypt, unsupervised when my dad was off doing his duties. And what an amazing experience, an amazing time, and a growth opportunity for her. What was that like for you when you started to venture off and go do the school abroad? That's a very interesting place. Some people go to Europe and some people go to
Yeah.
Asia, and you've gone
An
off
awful
to
lot of
Africa.
us
You've
Americans
gone
in,
off to
In
Africa, in the
Kampala.
Uganda.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was
Yeah.
that like?
I love that you expressed that about her really standing out in Cairo. And I think for me, that was one of the biggest actual lessons. It was a really unique program. It was all taught by local Ugandan professors. So we lived in we lived in somebody's home that lived there. And we really got a like not an expat, as much of an expat, I should say. I'm sure it was certainly tempered by the fact that we were American kids, but less of an expat experience and a little more authentic. And that meant that everywhere I went, I stood out. I was the white person, I had blonde hair at the time, and I really stood out. And everywhere I went, eyes were on me, and everything I did was scrutinized. And it was an incredibly formative experience because I grew up in Encinitas, predominantly white neighborhood. Northwestern was a little more diverse, but still very homogenous. And in all types of ways, racially, class, like the whole nine. And so to be in an environment where I really experienced full time what it felt like to never not have eyes on me, what gave me a really much better understanding of what it would be like to be a person of color in a
Mhm.
predominantly white environment. Obviously, nothing like what that's like in America, and with sort of the flipped this idea that I'm a Mzungu, I'm a white person, so I'm like fancy and wealthy and to be respected or whatever. Like it was a positive sort of projection of, but that was very unique and a unique privilege on its own, but it's still no less uncomfortable to be in that position all the time.
Yeah.
That was, I think, probably one of the most formative experiences I had from that time. The other piece being just learning how much I didn't know. I came in because I was an African studies major with 2.5, 3 years of African history under my belt. I came into the experience with a little more information than a lot of the other American
Mhm.
students who were studying other things and just wanted to be in Uganda and Rwanda. And I remember so distinctly, this was like the thing that really catalyzed my desire to get more involved in to get involved in the Darfur movement. Was we were driving back from Rwanda back to Kampala, and we had a really intense, I think, 2 weeks there. And on the radio, there was a report that came over the BBC that the president of South Sudan's plane had fallen out of the sky. And just a few weeks prior, there had been brokered a truce between Sudan and South Sudan, which ended a multi-decade long civil war. So
Mhm.
this person dying in a sort of mysterious plane crash jeopardized that. And I knew a little bit, and I started explaining what the politics of Sudan and how that related to Darfur. And the professor driving the van turned around and he was like, "You don't know what you're talking about. You sound very uneducated. You need to read more before you start teaching." And I was so embarrassed in front of he wasn't unkind. He just was like, that is be like I don't know, somebody trying to explain the politics of South Bay to who lives in Canada. I don't know, but
Yeah. Yeah.
it really fired me up to actually learn and to check myself on my sort of hubris about what I knew and what I didn't know. And that then inspired me to want to educate my peers about what was happening and involve them in trying to listen to the solutions that were being brought to us by the African Union, by people who were advocating for the US to do more, who were Sudanese and Darfuri, and to let them lead the conversation about what they needed and then use the power that we had as American voters to try to put that into play.
Yeah. How, not how, what's the emotion? What's the feeling that's going on inside of you as you're living there and you're going through this? journey of being in a foreign country, of learning all the things that you were learning and seeing all the things that you said you saw. What are the feelings that are going through it? It's easy to understand how that drives you and how that makes you make the decisions that will lead you to the next chapter of this journey. But what are you feeling? Because not everybody gets a chance to go and experience a country that's in experiencing genocide. They don't. And so
Yeah.
did that seem to drive you more towards a different direction had you studied somewhere else? Does that make, I don't want to sound
Yeah,
naive
no, I think
or, but
no, it
it's a
definitely,
huge experience. Huge.
yeah, it had a huge impact. And Rwanda, my time in Rwanda was a lot shorter than my time in Uganda, but I think when you're, and this was early 2000s, the genocide was in the 90s. So this
Mhm.
was very recent. And we would, like, you would talk to people who were like, yeah, that is like the house I hid in as a child when militias were coming through with Michelle. It was very recent in people's memory and even the physical damage of it, like on the buildings, at the memorials where there were still human remains, like visible. It just really made it seem very real. It removed any sense that this was hypothetical, like violence is hypothetical, that it made it very real that people can do horrible things to each other. And especially people like who know each other can do horrible
Mhm.
things to each other. I hadn't yet been to Europe. I think that was later in the next couple of years, and I like visited concentration camps in Germany and all that. But that felt even being there feels very real, but it's
Mhm.
a generation ago, and it
Mhm.
feels a little it's hard to imagine. But living in a
Sure.
place where you can still see it, like in the streets, in the pockmarks on the
Mhm.
buildings, it made it really real to me. And so I think that's why I felt so connected to what was going on in Darfur. There were people living this reality right then,
Mhm.
and I don't know if it's being a woman or being gay or I don't, just how I was raised in a theology that really espoused that we're all interconnected in a lot of ways, that it just
Mhm.
felt like my proximity to the issue didn't mitigate my responsibility to do something about it, and that
Mhm.
I should be speaking up and speaking out and doing what I could to help. And there's a million different ways that I could have been
Mhm.
involved at that moment. Again,
Yeah.
two wars that the US is involved in under questionable circumstances, like lots of injustices at home. But for whatever reason, I think that really, the experience of being there really made it seem much more personal to me
Mhm.
that I could imagine my friends from those places being a part of that and being impacted by it.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was in South Africa many years ago. I was there on safari with a family through my work, obviously coordinating this amazing trip. And we were in Johannesburg, which obviously was an amazing experience in of itself, staying in a hotel where Nelson Mandela wrote his manuscript. And even that was just, you're going through these amazing moments. And I'll never forget, they took us on a tour and we went to the city of Alexandria, where I think it was 300,000 people lived in a 3 square mile radius. And as we're on the bus on the way there, and we knew that there was poverty, we knew that there were some pretty dire conditions in our minds as Americans, as Californians, as privileged as we were, the assumptions that we had were met with such a stark reality, but it wasn't in what you think. Our experience was seeing this community of people who were tighter than any community that I've ever seen anywhere in the world. There may have been 5 or 6 or 7 people living in a shack with no floors, but they were beautifully dressed, clean. There was a beauty shop on every corner in a little shack, and the smiles and the sense of community, that welcomeness that we had. We went to an orphanage and were there with 60 children, and just it changed my life in a different way than the safari did. That in and of
Yeah.
itself, you're like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. It's not the zoo. But in that moment of being with those kids and spending time with these families and really understanding their plight, and this was by Zambia, so where we were, and they were still in the midst of a revolution even then, and Zimbabwe. So there was this incredible, wrong word, but there was this opportunity to really see that life was very different for many people, but at the end of the day, we were all human beings. We all wanted to be seen and heard and respected and safe. And for me, that was an experience that I came back with and changed. Unfortunately for me, I think it didn't drive me into a particular avenue like you. I'm impressed and very grateful and in awe of people like you who come back and continue this fight. I'm going to jump a little bit ahead because otherwise you'll only talk for 2 days. But
Sure.
so you have that experience and then you come home, right? So what happens then? What's that like? What's the next step?
So I think I there was a couple of kids at Northwestern who were already talking about what was going on in Sudan. There had been like MTV, and this is so crazy how this just wouldn't have been the case even like 10 years later, just because of the
Mhm.
way social media really revolutionized
Mhm.
how and what we were all talking about. But MTV had done a special about Darfur that a bunch of
Mhm.
college kids had seen. And there was a conference that was held at Georgetown University where a bunch of folks went and talked about what they could do. And a few of them were from Northwestern. And so they had started this little chapter at Northwestern, and I got involved and started getting more involved. And I have a brain for organizing. I just, as soon as I can see a system, I want to improve it and make it easier for people to engage with. And so I just started taking on more and more leadership roles. And we were we were our like the head, the president, and the sort of the leadership committee for this organization. It was called Stand Students Taking Action Now Darfur. It was all centered around Georgetown. So every semester we'd all fly out there on our own dime to do think about what the strategy was and then punch that all out to our various chapters. And it was really interesting. We grew so fast. I think we had 1 million people on our email list after the first
Wow.
year, which was crazy back then because people were just getting email addresses outside of their school emails and Facebook pages and things like that. And all of a sudden you have 1 million people who are really engaged and they're like, what's next? What do we do? And we felt really strongly that we didn't want to just do the type of activism that makes people feel good but doesn't accomplish anything. We really wanted to be strategic. And we were super fortunate that there were a number of people who had come out of the Clinton administration who had been in positions of authority when Rwanda occurred and had
Mhm.
really not done much about it, who felt extraordinary amounts of guilt for their failure to act in that situation. They were, a few of them, John Prendergast was one, were housed at the Center for American Progress, a liberal, so Democratic White House in waiting, because this is during the Bush administration. And we reached out to them and we said, look, we're a bunch of students. We have a huge amount of numbers, but we don't know what we should be asking for. We don't know how the levers of foreign policy work. Like, how do we get boots to the African Union soldier deploying without boots? How do we get training for these peacekeepers who have no training in gender-based violence, and yet like we know that half the population in these refugee camps are women? Like, how do we do that, and how do we get Congress involved in a smart way? And so they really helped guide us and say, this is what we could have used in Rwanda. Here are things we know that the African Union needs. So they became like the intel chip for the student movement so that we could actually advocate for things that were going to make a difference, build real political will to do that. So all of that was like it was like getting a master's in government relations the time I was an undergrad to the first couple of years out of college, to be able to be on the Hill, be in a senior leadership position at 23 years old, and with all this grassroots power behind us, and then actually be able to do things that were going to make it a priority for the US government. It was pretty cool.
I know I said I wasn't going to use this word, but I'm going to use it anyway. You're such a badass. I just love you. I really do. And I say that humbly because I know you are the most humble person. You are incredibly gracious and incredibly kind. You've hosted several events at your home, you and your wife, introducing the community to various political leaders and people running for office. And it's been such a pleasure to be in that space. And you're so humble and so gracious. And I just
Well,
appreciate
I'm
that.
not
So
going to be after all these compliments, Eric.
here's the thing. I think, especially these days, I'm on a compliments mission because we all need a little hug or a little
That's
love.
real.
That's
Yes.
real. And we all need to sometimes hear that who we are in the world and what we're doing in the world is making a difference. Whether that means you're making a difference in your own community, just within your community, or you're out changing policy and creating change. It doesn't matter. We're watching what's happening now in Texas with the floods, and we're watching communities come together to go out and search and rescue. It's a devastating and tragic situation, and that community will be changed forever. And yet, when you see the news and you're watching the people that have come together, they're out doing what they can. And that's where I believe our change will come. I think we're a little overwhelmed at the moment, and we see maybe a lot of noise coming at us. But I think if we can stay focused, it's the little things that we do. It's the reaching out, making sure that your friends are fine, your family's fine, that people are good in the community. If that's what you can do, go out and do it. Because not everybody has the opportunity to go out and do things to such a grand scale as others. And it's okay
100%.
because
And I would
it all
say
matters.
in a time where there's so much stuff that is just we're inundated with, whether it's lawful but awful, like deployments of the National Guard into the streets of
Mhm.
LA, to seeing friends and neighbors be snatched out of their homes, to all of the attacks on the LGBTQ community, on the specific attacks on trans people, especially trans people who served our country honorably, who are having their careers and lives upended and ripped apart by this like very hateful and spiteful administration. It's just so much. And the point, I think, of all of it is to make us feel cynical and like
Mhm.
it's all so bad. So I'm just going to tune it all out and I'm going to disconnect from other people and be alone. And in reality, like, not everyone has the ability to go to a protest or has the ability to go to Washington and bang on their elected official's door. But the power that I've found and the inspiration and hope I've found in our community and just in really doubling down on the things that I can control as an individual, my relationships, making sure I'm checking in on people. As I'm a board member of the San Diego LGBT Community Center.
Mhm.
That is like an organization that is doing incredible work every day, direct services to our community. And I have an easier job than anyone who actually works there because I am not in the trenches. I just get to tell people about the work they're doing and help them raise the resources to keep doing it. But that makes me feel I'm actually, like me specifically, I'm doing something that makes a difference. I'm not just adding to the noise. And I really try to not like amplify and put in my friends' faces all the bad stuff. My work is dealing with Washington now, and it's important to educate, but it's
Mhm.
also there's a point where it becomes so overwhelming that it just
Mhm.
causes people to feel like that's it, I'm out, I'm done. And that's
Mhm.
really that's when they've really won, is when they
Yeah.
make us feel like there's nothing we can do and we're disempowered and too
Mhm.
burned out. I
Yeah.
think it's great what you're doing here, Eric, like having these
Oh, thanks.
conversations and giving people the joy of our community and the stories that give people hope and inspiration. It's really neat.
Thank you. And it means the world to me coming from you. And I'm really proud of our town. I'm proud of San Diego. We've stepped up on a couple situations and circumstances. And we have a lot of people in our friendship circle that are out doing amazing things and running for office and making sure that people are getting into office. And we have people that are sticking stamps on postcards at the center. And we have people that are out knocking on doors. And even just like you said, checking in on people and doing what you can is what really makes a difference. I have a last couple questions that I have to ask
Sure.
you because I know I can't show up in your house again and not ask. When did you meet your beautiful wife?
Oh, thank you. We actually met through a lunatic dog that we now own together. So I had come back from my last deployment. I was stationed at MCRD San Diego, the recruit depot down by the airport. And I knew I was going to be getting out of the Marine Corps soon, and I really wanted a dog. And my mom was really sick at this point in my life. I was taking care of her. It was like a full-time second job. And I was feeling really emotionally run down, just gone through a breakup. And all I wanted was a dog to come home to and go running with and all that. But I had zero time. So every weekend I would try to get to the Humane Society as quickly as I could. But by the time I get there, there'd already be like 20 people in front of me. And the building that I lived in had breed restrictions at the time. So I couldn't like just adopt a pit bull. It had to be. So, anyways, I'm exhausted by everything that's going on in my life. I'm crying about this to a friend at a bar one night. And she's like, oh, actually, I have a friend who's looking to rehome her dog. And I have a photo and like information. She shows me the photo. She's a really good looking dog. And so I ended up texting this girl. She's like, you can come over and meet her. She's got some behavioral issues. And so I'm like, okay, I drive over in my pickup truck, get out. I'm wearing skinny jeans, like a denim shirt, boots. This girl opens the door. We're wearing the exact same outfit. She has the exact same truck that I do parked in the driveway. We're like, well, this dog is never going to know that it's changed. She's
It's
clearly
changed.
queer, yeah. So I ended up taking this dog. The dog is an absolute maniac, but she and I become friends. She introduces me to her circle of friends, and one of them was Carol, and that's how we met.
Okay.
But from Carol's side of the story, if she's telling it, she heard that the dog got rehomed. Her name is Koa, and she was like, What schmuck adopted that crazy dog?
Crazy dog.
Yeah, and now
I
she's the
love it.
favorite mother,
Oh,
and
I love it.
yeah, so
The dog's amazing. I've had the pleasure of meeting that dog. I love you two together. If you don't mind me sharing, every time I come to the house, I love the fact that you have chickens and you have your own eggs. I'm very jealous. I'm very jealous. I want to come over
you
for
should be.
breakfast.
They're amazing.
I want to come over for breakfast sometime and have your eggs.
You're welcome to.
But I just want to say thank you to both of you because, like I said, you're both very generous and you open your home and you allow people to come and learn and get educated. And they they learn and they experience what it means to be a stand for something just by virtue of being there. And so many times that I've been there and met some amazing people and heard some amazing stories of their own over the last couple of years, I've always left very grateful to you and to Carol for being that, not only that stand for us to be able to experience that, but also within the community, you two are just so well loved and needed and necessary. So I want to say thank you for not only who you are individually for the community and for the world at large and all the work that you do through your organization and through your foundation, but who you both are as far as a couple in the community is really important and powerful. So I want to thank you for that.
I appreciate that, and I will make sure to let
Please,
Carol know.
please do. What's next for you?
Right now, so the work that I do in DC is it's really principally focused on elevating the voices of vets and military families to have an impact on issues that matter to us. And that sometimes is like very straightforward, like making sure that this administration doesn't fire everyone who works at the Veterans Affairs Administration and guts our healthcare as they've stated that they want to do. But also, veterans are multidimensional people where our community is very diverse. A lot of veterans are immigrants. A lot of veterans care about conservation and public lands. A lot of veterans are members of the LGBTQ community. And so our special sort of niche is making sure that those stories are told, those voices are heard, and we're pushing through legislation that improves the lives of everyone in our community. And so we have a lot to fight back against right now. There's just, like we talked about earlier, so much going on, so much truly destructive things happening at both to the veterans community and in the active duty military. So lots to fight back against, but we're also not taking our eyes off what's ahead. And a big part of the work that I do is also focused on getting Democratic veterans elected at every level of office. So our last cycle, our priority races were a couple of races in the US Senate and in the House, but we also endorse all the way down ballot. And we had 169 candidates win the last cycle, all the way down to local school board in a lot of conservative and purple places. So we know that veterans are a really effective candidate to run in this environment. They can speak across party lines. They do appeal to people who might not be interested in voting for Democrats, but would vote for a veteran. And 2026 and beyond is really where we're keeping our eye on the ball. And then we're also suing the heck out of this administration all kinds of different ways. I feel very privileged to have a job that lets me have an avenue to fight back. And we've actually had some wins. We've won a couple of court cases. We succeeded in getting a horrible provision stripped out of the very, very bad, big, bad bill that just passed. But that provision would have made 250 million acres of public lands eligible for private sale. We got that out of the bill. We did that through organizing and strategic pressure. So it's not all bad. There's a lot that's really bad, but we're also winning on some front. I refuse to preemptively acquiesce to authoritarianism. So we're going to keep fighting and keep fighting for our democracy.
You bring up a good point. And before I say the point, you're always welcome to come back. There's a lot to unpack and there's a lot to talk about. So you are amazing. You're always welcome to come back and join and be a guest on the show. You made a good point, and I think it's something that Kate Bishop also said when I talked to her last season was so much is focused on the top of the ticket. So much is focused on that president, who's that going to be? And it's really important for people to get educated all the way down ballot to local school boards and to judges and all of those things. It's overwhelming, but there are ways, and I've learned so much over the past couple of years being around you all, there are ways for people to have it not be overwhelming. There are organizations that you can reach out to and you can use their recommendations on who to vote for in your ballot. So as we come up into midterms next year, I think it's important for people to not, like you said, don't bury yourself under the covers. Know that vote matters. Know that your voice matters. Talk to people. I'm having difficult conversations a lot these days that I thought I would never have to have with people that I never thought that I'd have to talk to about it. But it is so important. And I don't want people to feel overwhelmed because every single person can make a difference. So thank you for saying that, because it just prompted me to remember that you've got to look at the ballot. It can't just be at the top. It's got to go all the way down to the bottom. So thank you for that.
That's exactly
Um,
right. And the flip side of that too is that there are a lot of issues out there that might not seem like they directly impact us or you specifically. I know in our community, for instance, like people don't necessarily see the connection between the fight for trans rights and their own
mhm.
lives as members of
Yes.
the lesbian or gay community. The reality is that all of these cases, court cases and policies, like they are all connected on the far right's brain.
Mhm.
And the Skermeti Supreme Court decision that just came out, that is a test case and proving ground for a gay marriage challenge. And so if you think that what's happening to trans people doesn't impact you, or you think that the kidnapping of people by ununiformed masked men on a street doesn't impact you because you're not an immigrant. Like all of these things are erosions of our rights that we've fought
Mhm.
hard for, whether it's the right to marriage or the right to rule of law and due process. And I think you don't have to be a member of a particular community to ally to that community. And I think we need to not fall for the trap of being divided and really stand
Mhm.
together in these core democratic principles that we all believe in.
Yeah. Yeah, I've used this visual a lot with people that I've talked to, and it makes me not feel so overwhelmed. But I've likened this administration to Pigpen in the Peanuts cartoon, who shows up and there's just dust kicked up everywhere. And I have a client like this, and they leave, and you're like looking through the dust. You're like, what just happened? They're kicking the dust up on purpose because
Right.
people don't think that these things that are happening will affect them or relate to them. And that's the key component of the conversation that I'm having now with a few people, is that you think that these harsh and horrific things that are happening to the trans community don't affect you, but they do, because they affect me. They affect my chosen family and the people that I care about. And at some level, they're going to affect you and someone that you know down the road. And so it's not just about what you think is your little bubble. And I've used that pig pen analogy a lot. Makes people laugh a little bit, which I think is
That's
also
good.
important. It's
Yeah.
important because it's true. It's like the dust is all flying and we're completely lost in our own dust. And that's intentional. It's
Yeah.
intentional, and to not stick your head in the ground. So, my last question to you on this conversation is, if you could go back to that young Janessa in elementary school, living in Encinitas, eating her tofu, what would you tell her about her life today?
I think I would say that I like hit the jackpot at the time of my life that I live. And there might be other millennials who are like, what are you talking about? We've been living through crisis after crisis. But for me personally, like I grew up in a time where gay people had no rights and couldn't get married, couldn't serve in the military, couldn't even be open like safely. And I live a life now where I'm married to a beautiful, incredible person. I was able to serve openly and be discharged honorably. I'm able to use my voice and who I am as a person as like a thing that is my whole sort of professional life. It's tied to my personal experience and the change that I want to create in the world. And so I feel like I stand on the shoulders of a lot of people who came before me who fought for those things and struggled and lost a lot in order for me to have the life I have now. And so I would think I would tell my younger self that you are benefiting greatly from all of those things and you're living a life of purpose and with a lot of joy in it, and that you owe that to the little girls that are and little boys that are growing up now to make sure that they have the same rights, not less, more ability, more upward mobility, and that we're going to be in the fight for the long haul.
Goosebumps happens every time. Goosebumps. Amazing. Thank you again, Janessa, so much for being
Thank
here.
you, Eric. This is
I
a real
really
pleasure.
appreciate you, and thanks for who you are. Appreciate you.
Likewise. Take
Bye
care.
for now. Bye. All right, everyone. Thank you again for joining us on today's episode. I hope our conversation resonated with you like it did me, and I cannot wait to sit down with you all again next week. Remember to subscribe to the Just You podcast on your favorite platform so you can make sure not to miss a new episode, which drop every Thursday. If you like what you hear, you can easily share the podcast and episode directly with your friends. And if you would, rate us and leave us a review. We'd love to hear from you. You can also follow us on Instagram at Just Do You Pod. As you go out into the world today, remember to just do you. All right. Talk next week.